The lights of Neo Angeles sparkled like diamonds against the dark sky of Kepler 442c. From his penthouse window, Keanu Martinez watched the city come alive as 3 moons rose over the horizon. Flying cars moved between the tall buildings like glowing fish in an ocean of metal and glass. This was his favorite time of evening, when the busy day gave way to the magic of night. Tonight was special. Tonight was the annual charity party that Keanu held every year to help schools across the galaxy. People from 12 different worlds would come to his home. Some looked like humans, others were very different. All of them shared one thing. They believed in making the universe a better place for everyone. Keanu adjusted his simple black suit and smiled. He was 423 years old, but modern medicine kept him looking like a man in his 30s. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his kind eyes held the wisdom of centuries. He had seen the birth of new worlds and the fall of old empires. Through it all, he had learned that kindness was the most powerful force in the galaxy. Maria Santos moved quietly through the large living room, checking every detail. She had worked for Keanu for 30 years, and she knew exactly how he liked things. The woman was in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her uniform was perfectly clean and pressed. She spoke softly to the other workers, making sure the food was ready and the drinks were cold. Keanu watched her work and felt grateful. Maria was more than an employee. She was family. When he had been sick with Rigel fever 5 years ago, she had stayed by his bed day and night. When he felt lost after his last movie failed, she had made him soup and told him that everyone has bad days. She never asked for anything in return. The first guests began to arrive as the city lights grew brighter. Captain Jake Morrison came first, wearing his dress uniform from the Space Defense Force. The tall man with short brown hair had been Keanu's friend since they were young. Behind him came Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a scientist who studied alien life forms. She had discovered 3 new species in the past year alone. More people arrived quickly. There was Ambassador Krell from the Vegan Trade Union, his blue skin shining under the lights. He brought gifts of rare crystals from his home world. 2 Andromedian scholars came next, their tall, thin bodies moving gracefully across the room. They spoke in musical voices about their latest research into faster-than-light travel. The penthouse filled with conversation in dozens of languages. Universal translators helped everyone understand each other, but Keanu had learned to speak 7 alien languages himself. He moved from group to group listening to stories from across the galaxy. A young human couple told him about their new baby, the first human born on the mining world of Titan 7. An old Centaurian merchant shared news from the Outer Rim, where new planets were being discovered every month. Maria appeared at his elbow with a glass of water. She knew he didn't drink alcohol at these parties. He needed to stay sharp to remember everyone's names and stories. She also brought him a small plate of food, knowing he often forgot to eat when he was busy talking to guests. The party was in full swing when Commander Alex Turner arrived. He was the head of the Interspecies Relations Committee, the group that helped different worlds work together. Turner was a serious man who rarely smiled, but tonight he seemed relaxed. He brought news that 3 more worlds had joined the Galactic Education Program that Keanu's charity supported. As the evening went on, more guests filled the penthouse. The view from the windows showed the entire city spread out below them. Humans and aliens walked the streets together, shopping in markets that sold goods from 100 worlds. Children played in parks while their parents talked about everything from art to science to the best recipes for Martian vegetables. The party represented everything Keanu believed in. Here, under one roof, beings from across the galaxy came together as friends. They shared food, stories, and dreams. They worked together to solve problems and help those in need. This was what the future could look like if everyone chose to see past their differences. Maria moved through the crowd like a gentle ghost, making sure everyone had what they needed. She helped an elderly Andromedian find a comfortable chair. She brought special food for guests who couldn't eat human meals. She even found a quiet corner for a shy young diplomat who seemed overwhelmed by the crowd. Keanu noticed how the other guests treated Maria. Most smiled and thanked her politely. Some of the humans who knew her well asked about her grandchildren. The Andromedan scholars bowed slightly when she approached, showing the respect their culture gave to all workers. Even Ambassador Krell, who came from a world where servants were common, spoke to her as an equal. The evening was going perfectly. The charity had already raised enough money to build schools on 5 new worlds. Old friends were reuniting and new friendships were forming. Keanu felt proud of what they had accomplished together. Then he saw the transport ship landing on his private platform. It was bigger than the others, made of silver metal that gleamed like a mirror. The ship bore the symbols of the Centaurian Empire, one of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. Centaurians were known for their advanced technology and great wealth. They were also known for believing that some species were better than others. As the ship's door opened, Keanu saw Ambassador Zixthara step out. She was tall and elegant, with pale blue skin and silver hair that seemed to glow in the moonlight. Her dress was made from silk that came from a world where each thread cost more than most people made in a year. Behind her came 4 other Centaurians, all dressed in expensive clothes and jewelry. Keanu walked to greet them as he did with all his guests. But something in the ambassador's eyes made him pause. There was a coldness there, a look of someone who thought they were better than everyone around them. Still, he smiled and welcomed them to his home. The ambassador looked around the room with obvious judgment. Her eyes stopped on Maria, who was serving drinks to a group of human diplomats. The look on Zixthara's face was not kind. It was the look of someone who saw not a person but a thing to be used. Keanu felt a chill run down his spine. In all his years, he had learned to trust his feelings about people. And right now, his feelings were telling him that trouble had just walked into his home. Ambassador Zixthara moved through the party like she owned the place. Her expensive dress rustled with each step, and the jewels on her neck caught the light from every angle. The other Centaurians followed behind her, their faces showing the same cold pride. They looked at the other guests like they were studying insects under a microscope. Keanu tried to make conversation with the ambassador, but she barely listened. Her attention kept drifting to other things in the room. She examined the artwork on his walls and made small sounds of disapproval. She tasted the food and wrinkled her nose. Nothing seemed good enough for her high standards. The other guests began to notice the tension. Captain Jake Morrison stood near the window, his hand resting on his belt where his weapon would normally be. Dr. Elena Rodriguez whispered quietly to Commander Turner, both of them watching the Centaurians with worried eyes. Even Ambassador Krell seemed uncomfortable, his blue skin turning slightly darker as it did when his people felt stressed. Maria continued her work, moving from group to group with her usual quiet grace. She refilled glasses and replaced empty food plates. She helped an old Andromedian scholar find his medicine when he started coughing. She brought a special cushion for a vegan trader whose back was hurting. None of the problems were big, but Maria noticed them all and fixed them before anyone else even saw there was trouble. Ambassador Zixthara had been drinking Centaurian crystal wine since she arrived. The purple liquid was much stronger than human alcohol, and it was making her behavior worse with each glass. She began speaking louder, telling stories about the great Centaurian Empire and how they had conquered 12 star systems. Her voice carried across the room, drowning out other conversations. The turning point came when Maria approached the ambassador's group with a tray of fresh drinks. She moved carefully, knowing that crystal wine could stain clothing permanently if spilled. Her steps were quiet and respectful, as they always were when serving guests. Ambassador Zixthara looked up as Maria drew near. The woman's pale eyes were now bright with wine and anger. She had been watching Maria all evening, and something about the housekeeper seemed to make her furious. Perhaps it was the way other guests treated Maria with kindness. Perhaps it was how Maria moved through the room with dignity despite her simple job. Or perhaps it was just that Maria was human, and Zixthara believed humans were beneath her. Notice. The ambassador's voice cut through the room like a knife. She spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear, using the universal translator so her words would be understood by all species present. "Look at this pathetic creature," she said, pointing at Maria with one long finger. crawling around on the floor, serving her betters like a trained animal. This is what happens when inferior species try to act civilized. The room fell silent. Every conversation stopped. Even the soft music playing in the background seemed to fade away. Maria's face went pale, but she continued holding the tray steady. Her hands shook slightly, but she did not drop anything or run away. Ambassador Zixthera was not finished. The wine had loosened her tongue, and years of believing in Zentorian superiority poured out in a stream of cruel words. On my world, we would never allow such primitive beings to touch our food or enter our homes. She continued, humans are barely above animals. They should be grateful we even allow them to exist in civilized space. Some of the other Zentorians laughed, though their laughter sounded nervous. The rest of the room remained frozen in shock. Nobody seemed to know what to do. This was a diplomatic event, and Zixthera was a powerful ambassador. Speaking against her could cause problems between entire worlds. But the ambassador was not done with her cruelty. She lifted her glass of crystal wine high in the air and then deliberately turned it over, pouring the purple liquid all over Maria's clean uniform. The wine soaked through the white fabric, staining it permanently. Drops fell to the expensive carpet below. "Clean that up immediately, creature," Zixthera commanded. "And be grateful I don't have you removed from decent society where you belong." Maria stood perfectly still for a moment, the wine dripping from her clothes to the floor. Her face showed no anger, only sadness. She had worked for 30 years to build a good reputation. She had always been proud of her clean uniform and professional appearance. Now she stood before a room full of important people, stained and humiliated. Without saying a word, Maria knelt down and began cleaning up the spilled wine. She pulled a small cloth from her pocket and started dabbing at the purple stains on the white carpet. Her movements were careful and practiced, as if she had done this many times before. The sight of Maria kneeling on the floor while Ambassador Zixthera stood over her created a terrible picture. Here was a woman who had spent her life taking care of others, now being treated like dirt by someone who had probably never worked a day in her life. Captain Morrison took a step forward, his face red with anger. His hand moved toward where his weapon would normally hang. Dr. Rodriguez grabbed his arm, but her own eyes were blazing with fury. Commander Turner looked like he was about to be sick. Even the non-human guests seemed disturbed by what they were seeing. Ambassador Zixthera enjoyed the attention. She smiled down at Maria and continued her verbal attack. "This is the natural order," she announced to the room. "The strong rule and the weak serve. Centaurians are the most advanced species in the galaxy. We have the best technology, the strongest military, and the most sophisticated culture. Humans are useful for simple labor, but they should never forget their place." She kicked at the cloth in Maria's hand, making the cleaning even more difficult. "Faster, creature. Your betters are waiting and you're taking too long. Perhaps you are too stupid to understand simple commands." Maria continued working without looking up. Tears ran down her cheeks, but she did not make a sound. She had grandchildren who depended on her job. She had bills to pay and responsibilities to keep. She could not afford to fight back, no matter how badly she was being treated. Across the room, Keanu Martinez watched everything with growing anger. His hands were clenched into fists, and his jaw was tight with rage. This was his home, his party, and his friend being attacked. For 30 years, Maria had been part of his family. She had cared for him when he was sick, celebrated with him when he was happy, and comforted him when he was sad. Now she knelt on his floor, cleaning up wine that had been poured on her by a woman who thought cruelty was a sign of strength. The room waited to see what would happen next. Everyone could feel that something important was about to occur, something that would change everything. Keanu Martinez set down his glass of water with a soft click. The sound seemed loud in the silent room. Every eye was on Maria as she knelt on the floor, still trying to clean the purple wine stains from the white carpet. Ambassador Zixthera stood over her with a cruel smile, enjoying the power she felt over another person. But Keanu had seen enough. He walked across the room with calm, measured steps. His expensive shoes made no sound on the thick carpet. The crowd of guests parted, before him like water, creating a clear path to where Maria knelt. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The only sound was the soft rustle of cloth as Maria continued working. When Keanu reached the spot where the wine had spilled, he did something that shocked everyone in the room. Without saying a word, he knelt down beside Maria. His expensive, black suit touched the stained carpet. His perfectly styled hair fell forward as he bent down. Then he pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket and began helping Maria clean up the mess. The room gasped. Here was one of the most famous men in the galaxy, a person who had dined with presidents and alien emperors, kneeling on the floor beside his housekeeper. His actions spoke louder than any words could have. Ambassador Zixathera's mouth fell open in shock. She had expected Keanu to apologize to her, maybe even punish Maria for causing trouble. She had not expected this. The other Zentarians behind her looked confused and angry. This was not how things were supposed to work. Maria looked at Keanu with tears in her eyes. She tried to whisper that he should not be doing this, that she could handle it alone. But Keanu just smiled at her and continued cleaning. His movements were gentle and careful, treating the simple task with the same attention he gave to everything important in his life. The silence in the room was complete. Andromedan scholars stared with wide eyes. Vegan traders whispered to each other in their musical language. Human guests looked proud and sad at the same time. Even the service staff had stopped working to watch what was happening. When the last of the wine was cleaned up, Keanu and Maria stood together. Maria's uniform was still stained, but her dignity had been restored by the simple act of someone caring enough to help her. Keanu's suit now had purple spots on the knees, but he did not seem to care. Then Keanu turned to face Ambassador Zixathera. His voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. There was no anger in his tone, only a deep sadness and disappointment. "Ambassador," he said, "I want you to meet Maria Santos. She has been part of my family for 30 years. When I was sick with fever, she sat by my bed and made sure I took my medicine. When I felt lost and alone, she made me soup and reminded me that tomorrow would be better. When I needed someone to trust with my home and my life, she never let me down." He paused, looking around the room at all the faces watching him. Maria has raised 3 children and helped raise 6 grandchildren. She has worked 2 jobs to pay for her daughter's medical school. She volunteers at the children's hospital every weekend, reading stories to sick kids. She has never asked me for anything except the chance to do good work and be treated with respect. Ambassador Zixathera's face was turning red with anger. She was not used to being lectured, especially not by someone she considered beneath her notice. "How dare you speak to me this way?" she hissed. "I am an ambassador of the Zentorian Empire. You are nothing but a human actor who pretends to be important. Your servant spilled wine on me and deserved to be punished." Keanu shook his head slowly. His voice remained calm and steady. "Maria did not spill anything. You poured wine on her because you could. You humiliated her because you thought it would make you feel powerful. But real power does not come from hurting people who cannot fight back. Real strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down." The ambassador's voice rose to a shout. "The Zentorian Empire controls 50 star systems. We have weapons that could destroy your entire world. We have technology that makes human science look like children playing with toys. We are your superiors in every way that matters." Keanu looked at her for a long moment. When he spoke again, his words were even quieter than before, but they seemed to fill the entire room. "You know what I see when I look at you, Ambassador? I see someone who is afraid. You are afraid that if you treat other people with kindness, they might realize that you are not as important as you pretend to be. You are afraid that if you show respect to someone like Maria, people might notice that she has more real worth than you do." The room was so quiet that the sound of breathing seemed loud. Every guest was watching this confrontation between one of humanity's most beloved figures and one of the galaxy's most powerful diplomats. "You have ships and weapons and technology," Keanu continued, "but you do not have what Maria has. You do not have the respect that comes from a life spent helping others. You do not have the love of people who know you will always be there when they need you. You do not have the quiet strength that lets someone face cruelty with dignity." Ambassador Zixathera was shaking with rage. Her pale blue skin had turned almost purple with anger. Behind her, the other Zentorians looked uncomfortable. They had expected their ambassador to be treated with honor and respect. Instead, she was being gently, but firmly put in her place by a human who refused to be intimidated. "This is an insult to the Zentorian people," she shouted. "There will be consequences for this. Economic sanctions, military pressure. Your human colonies will suffer for your arrogance." Keanu nodded calmly. "Perhaps, but that is a price I am willing to pay to stand up for what is right. You see, Ambassador, you have made one important mistake tonight. You assume that because Maria works for me, she is less important than you are. But the truth is exactly the opposite." He turned to look at Maria, who was standing beside him with quiet dignity despite her stained uniform. "Maria makes my life better every day. She brings joy and kindness into this world. She helps people who need help and asks for nothing in return. You, on the other hand, have brought nothing but cruelty and hatred into my home tonight." The ambassador opened her mouth to reply, but Keanu was not finished speaking. "In my home, we treat all people with respect, regardless of what planet they come from or what job they do. If you cannot accept that simple rule, then you are not welcome here." The silence that followed Keanu's words felt like it could last forever. Ambassador Zixithera stood frozen, her face twisted with rage and shock. Nobody had ever spoken to her like this before. In the Zentorian Empire, her word was law. Entire planets bowed when she arrived. But here, in this human's home, she was being told she was not welcome. Keanu looked around the room at all the faces watching him. Some looked scared, others looked excited. All of them were waiting to see what would happen next. He took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. "Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings from across the galaxy," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "I would like you all to gather in the main hall. There is something I need to say to everyone." The guests began moving slowly toward the large open space in the center of the penthouse. Humans walked next to Andromedians. Vegan traders helped elderly scholars find comfortable places to stand. Even the service staff stopped their work to listen. Only Ambassador Zixithara and her group remained where they were, too proud and angry to follow Keanu's request. When everyone had gathered, Keanu stood before them with Maria at his side. The woman's uniform was still stained with purple wine, but she held her head high. Her eyes were red from crying, but her voice was steady when Keanu asked if she was all right. Keanu looked out at the crowd of beings from a dozen different worlds. These were some of the most powerful people in the galaxy. They controlled trade routes, commanded fleets of ships, and made decisions that affected billions of lives. Tonight, they would hear something that would make them think about what it really meant to be civilized. "My friends," Keanu began, "tonight you have seen something that I hope will never happen again. You have seen how power can be used to hurt those who cannot fight back. You have seen how wealth and technology can make some beings think they are better than others." He paused, letting his words sink in. Several guests nodded in agreement. Others looked uncomfortable, perhaps remembering times when they had not stood up for what was right. "But you have also seen something else," Keanu continued. "You have seen the true strength that comes from treating others with kindness and respect. Maria Santos showed that strength tonight. Even when she was being attacked and humiliated, she kept her dignity. She did not fight back with anger or hatred. She simply continued to be the good person she has always been." Captain Jake Morrison stepped forward from the crowd. The tall military officer looked directly at Ambassador Zixithera as he spoke. "Keanu is right," Morrison said in his strong, clear voice. "I have served in the Space Defense Force for 20 years. I have seen the best and worst that different species can offer. Tonight I saw the worst from someone who claims to represent civilization, and I saw the best from a woman who asks for nothing but the chance to do honest work." Dr. Elena Rodriguez moved to stand beside Morrison. The scientist's voice was quiet but firm. "In my research, I have studied life forms from across the galaxy," she said. "I have learned that intelligence and technology do not make a species superior. What makes beings truly advanced is how they treat others, especially those who have less power than they do. One by one, other guests began to step forward. Ambassador Krell from the Vegan Trade Union spoke in his musical voice about how humans had helped his people during their first contact with galactic civilization. An Andromedan scholar told a story about a human doctor who had saved her life on a distant world, asking for nothing in return. Commander Turner had been quiet through most of the evening, torn between his diplomatic duties and his personal feelings. Now he faced the most important decision of his career. As head of the Interspecies Relations Committee, his words would carry weight throughout the galaxy. Turner stepped forward, his official uniform crisp and formal. When he spoke, his voice was strong and sure. "Tonight I have witnessed something that will be reported to every member world of the Galactic Council," he announced. "I have seen a clear example of the values that should guide all civilized beings: respect for others, kindness to those in need, the courage to stand up for what is right, even when it is difficult." He turned to look directly at Ambassador Zix Thera, who was still standing apart from the crowd with her Zentorian companions. "I have also seen behavior that has no place in civilized society," Turner continued. "The deliberate humiliation of another being, the abuse of power and position, the belief that some lives matter more than others." Ambassador Zix Thera could not stay quiet any longer. Her voice cut through the hall like broken glass. "How dare you stand there and judge me?" she screamed. "The Zentorian Empire has the largest fleet in the galaxy. We control the most profitable trade routes. Our technology is centuries ahead of yours. You need us more than we need you." But her words only made her isolation more complete. Even some of her own Zentorian companions began to step away from her. They had seen the looks on the faces of the other guests. They understood that something had changed tonight, and their ambassador was on the wrong side of that change. One young Zentorian diplomat, barely old enough to hold his position, spoke up in a voice that shook with nervousness. "Ambassador, perhaps we should consider that our hosts have a point," he said carefully. "The Empire has always valued strength, but maybe we have forgotten that true strength includes compassion." Zix Thera whirled around to face him, her eyes blazing with fury. "Silence, you fool. You are here to observe, not to think. The old ways have made our empire great, and they will keep us great." But her angry words only pushed more people away from her. The young Zentorian diplomat looked at Keanu and Maria, then back at his ambassador. When he spoke again, his voice was stronger. "I disagree, Ambassador. Tonight I have learned something important. Power without kindness is not strength. It is weakness disguised as strength." The crowd murmured approval at his words. Other beings began sharing their own stories of human kindness and generosity. They talked about times when humans had helped them, defended them, or simply treated them as equals when no one else would. Ambassador Zix Thera realized that she was losing control of the situation. Her face grew darker with rage and her voice became shrill with desperation. "You will all regret this insult to the Zentorian Empire," she shouted. "There will be economic sanctions against every world represented here. Trade agreements will be canceled. Military protection will be withdrawn. You will learn what happens when you cross us." But her threats fell on deaf ears. The beings in the room had seen something more powerful than weapons or wealth tonight. They had seen the simple human idea that every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Keanu raised his hand and the room fell quiet again. When he spoke, his voice was calm and peaceful. "Ambassador Zix Thera, you are welcome to leave my home now. Your actions tonight have shown everyone here what kind of person you truly are. I think that is consequence enough." 3 months had passed since the night that changed everything. The story of what happened at Keanu Martinez's party had spread across the galaxy faster than the fastest starships. News reporters called it the Martinez moment. Teachers used it in schools to explain the difference between power and true strength. Even children on distant worlds knew the story of the famous man who knelt down to help his housekeeper. Keanu sat in his study, reading reports from across human space and beyond. The morning sun of Kepler 442c streamed through his windows, painting everything in warm golden light. On his desk were letters from hundreds of people who had heard about that night. Some were from humans, but many came from other species who had been inspired by what they learned. Maria knocked softly on his door and entered with his morning coffee. She wore a beautiful new dress instead of her old uniform. 3 months ago, she had been just a housekeeper. Now she was the coordinator of the Maria Santos Foundation, an organization that Keanu had created to promote dignity and respect for working people throughout the galaxy. The change in Maria's life had been amazing to watch. At first, she had been embarrassed by all the attention. She did not understand why people wanted to hear her speak at universities and conferences. But slowly, she had realized that her story could help others who faced the same kind of treatment she had received that night. Just last week, she had spoken to a gathering of service workers on the mining world of Titan 7. She told them that their jobs were important and that they deserved to be treated with respect. She explained that dignity did not come from how much money someone made or what planet they came from. It came from how they treated others and how they carried themselves through difficult times. The results of that night had spread far beyond anything Keanu had expected. The Zentorian government had been forced to recall Ambassador Zixathera after news of her behavior reached their home world. The Emperor himself had issued a public apology, saying that her actions did not represent Zentorian values. More importantly, the incident had started conversations on dozens of worlds about how different species should treat each other. The young Zentorian diplomat who had spoken up that night, a man named Kiltar, had become a leader in his government's effort to change their approach to other cultures. Kiltar had visited Keanu just 2 weeks ago. The young man had been nervous and respectful, clearly still learning how to interact with beings he had been taught to consider inferior, but his effort was genuine, and his questions showed that he truly wanted to understand. During their meeting, Kiltar had explained how things were changing on his home world. Younger Zentorians who had grown up hearing stories about other species were questioning the old beliefs about superiority. They wanted to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than fear and domination. The changes were not just happening among the Zentorians. Commander Turner had reported that applications to join the Galactic Education Program had increased by 300%. Worlds that had never shown interest in working together were now asking how they could help build schools and share knowledge. Captain Morrison had been promoted to Admiral and put in charge of a new program called the Interspecies Cooperation Initiative. His job was to help different military forces work together more effectively. He often told people that the most important lesson he had learned came from watching Keanu kneel down beside Maria that night. Dr. Rodriguez had received funding for her research from sources she had never expected. Zentorian scientists, inspired by the new spirit of cooperation, had offered to share their advanced technology to help her study life forms on distant worlds. Together, they had already discovered 5 new species and learned important things about how life develops in different environments. But perhaps the most important changes were happening in small ways across the galaxy. Restaurant owners were treating their workers better. Ship captains were showing more respect to their crews. Children were learning in school that being different did not mean being inferior. The party tonight would be the first anniversary celebration of the Maria Santos Foundation. Keanu had invited many of the same people who had been there that terrible night 3 months ago. But this time, the mood would be very different. As evening approached, guests began arriving at the penthouse. The first to come was Admiral Morrison, wearing his new uniform with obvious pride. Behind him came Dr. Rodriguez, excited to share news about her latest discoveries. Commander Turner arrived with a group of young diplomats from various worlds who were learning how to build better relationships between species. Ambassador Krell brought gifts from the Vegan Trade Union, including a beautiful crystal that would be displayed in the Foundation's new headquarters. The Andromedian scholars presented Maria with a book of poetry, written in her honor by children from their homeworld. The biggest surprise came when the transport ship landed on Keanu's private platform. It was a Zentorian vessel, but smaller and simpler than the one that had brought Zixathera. From it stepped Kiltar, now promoted to senior cultural ambassador, along with 3 other young Zentorians who were part of their government's new Respect and Understanding Council. Kiltar approached Keanu and Maria with obvious nervousness. In his hands, he carried a formal scroll written in both Zentorian and human languages. The scroll was an official apology from the Zentorian emperor and a promise to work toward better relationships with all species. More than that, it announced that the Zentorian government would be contributing 1 million credits to the Maria Santos Foundation each year for the next 10 years. Maria read the scroll with tears in her eyes. 3 months ago, she had been humiliated by a Zentorian ambassador. Now the entire Zentorian government was asking for her forgiveness and offering to support her work. As the evening progressed, Keanu found himself standing in the same spot, where Maria had knelt to clean up spilled wine 3 months earlier. The stain was gone now, cleaned by professional services, but the memory remained crystal clear. Maria joined him, wearing her elegant new dress and a smile that lit up her entire face. Around them, beings from across the galaxy talked and laughed, together. Children of different species played games in the corner while their parents discussed plans for new schools and cultural exchange programs. Looking out at the crowd, Keanu saw the future he had always dreamed of. Here were beings who had chosen to see past their differences. They had decided that kindness was more important than power, that respect mattered more than wealth, and that the way someone treated others revealed their true character. Maria squeezed his arm gently and pointed toward the windows. Outside, the city of Neo Angeles sparkled under 3 moons. Flying cars moved between buildings filled with beings from dozens of worlds. In the parks below, families of different species walked together, their children playing and learning from each other. This was what the galaxy could become when people chose to treat each other with dignity and respect. It had started with one man's decision to kneel down and help someone who needed help. Now it was spreading to every corner of known space. Keanu smiled as he watched his guests. Tonight was not about him or his fame. It was about Maria and the millions of other beings like her who worked hard, treated others with kindness, and deserved to be valued for who they were rather than what job they did. The future was brighter because of what happened on one difficult night when someone chose to do the right thing even when it was hard.